Now, yesterday I came across this really amazing video interaction between, I say amazing with sarcasm, video interaction between two American politicians. One, Mitt Romney, who is a Republican senator, and American Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who we have seen dominating the news headlines for last 7 months quite a lot. So these two men were discussing primarily the situation in Gaza and how it has influenced the politics around the world. Now I want you to watch few things here carefully, because these people play their politics very subtly, and often ordinary people, they are not able to decipher the politics or hidden agenda from what they're saying. So Mitt Romney was asking Anthony Blinken about why Hamas was reluctant to accept the ceasefire deal. To which Blinken says that if Hamas indeed claims to represent Palestinian people, then it should accept the ceasefire deal in the interest of Palestinians, so that Palestinians don't go through any more suffering. Now, when Mitt Romney asked Blinken about Benjamin Netanyahu, then what he says? He says, Benjamin Netanyahu is just, doing what most of Israelis want. So he justified Netanyahu's action of genocidal intent in Gaza by saying that he's merely representing the sentiments of most of Israelis. But when it comes to Hamas, Hamas must accept whatever they are being asked to accept, so that Israelis don't kill more Palestinians. Now the another one, which is quite laughable, that these two men wonder why Israelis have lost the PR war. And they are actually justifying the proposed ban on TikTok in America. I mean, we knew that they are a shameless bunch of people. These American politicians are a shameless bunch of people. But if they can go to this extent, that they are actually admitting in their official program, a program that is being live streamed by, from the official channel of the State Department. The reason why they are proposing a ban on TikTok is because TikTok is the only platform where Israelis have not been able to control the narrative. As I say that because if you go to any other social media platforms today, you won't be able to accurately portray the picture of Israeli atrocities. Hence, this complaint there. Also notice Anthony Blinken time and again talking about Hamas taking shelter in hospitals, in mosques, in schools. This is to justify why Israelis have destroyed every single mosque, hospital, schools, or other public, libraries. Because these are war crimes. If you don't justify, then they will be deemed as war crimes. And as well as Israelis, Americans should also be in the dock. So that's another way to create an alternative narrative that, look, we have committed these war crimes, but they are not war crimes because we thought Hamas fighters were hiding in those facilities. So with these things in mind, I want you to watch this interaction. This is quite an interesting interaction.
First, I'm just going to talk with regards to the trip to the Middle East. Give us the lowdown. Give us the rundown. What is happening there? What's happening among the Israeli people? What is Bibi Netanyahu thinking? What's happening with Hamas? What kind of a deal has been put on the table? What is it, the people, the leadership in Qatar? You see, I can get all my questions out. I mean, give us a full lay of the land, and then we can sort of probe areas of interest.
So, in this moment, the best thing that can happen would be for the agreement that's on the table, that's being considered by Hamas, to have a ceasefire, the release of hostages, the possibility of really surging humanitarian assistance to people who so desperately need it. That's what we're focused on. And as I was talking to various colleagues this morning, and I see one of my closest colleagues, John Feiner, the Deputy National Security Advisor here, we await a response from Hamas. We await to see whether, in effect, they can take yes for an answer on the ceasefire and release of hostages. And the reality in this moment is the only thing standing between the people of Gaza and a ceasefire is Hamas. So we look to see what they will do. In the meantime, even as we're doing that, we are working every single day. The president's working every single day to make sure that we are doing what we can so that the people in Gaza who are caught in a crossfire of Hamas's making get the help, the assistance, the support they need. And we're doing that with partners like the World Food Program. And of course, we're working with many other governments. We're working with Israel. I was just there, as you said, and I got to see firsthand some of the progress that's been made in recent weeks in actually getting assistance to people who need it. Progress is real. It's still not enough. And we are trying to make sure that in everything we do, we're supporting those efforts. If you step back, I think we've seen a few things in the last few weeks. Some incredibly promising, others incredibly daunting. And to start with the daunting, we now have, with Israelis and Palestinians, two absolutely traumatized societies. And when this conflict ends, building back from that trauma is going to be an extraordinary task. We also see in all directions, and I think we're seeing this not only in the region, we're seeing it around the world. To some extent, we're seeing it in our own country. Maybe the biggest poison that we have to fight constantly, and that is dehumanization. The inability to see the humanity in the other. And when that happens, hearts get hardened and everything becomes so much more difficult. So the other great task that I think we're going to have when we get through this is to build back that sense of common humanity. And I hope we can do that amongst ourselves as well. But there's also some promise. There's promise in that one of the things we've been working on for a long time with the President's leadership over many months is seeking to normalize relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And for Israel, this would be the realization of something that it sought from day one of its existence, normal relations with other countries in the region. This is something we were working on before October 7th. In fact, I was due to go to Israel and Saudi Arabia on October 10th to work on this, and in particular, to work on the Palestinian piece of the puzzle. Because for us, for the Saudis, if we're able to move forward on normalization, it has to include also moving forward on the aspirations of the Palestinian people. So I think there's an equation that you can see, a different path that countries in the region can be on and really want to be on, which is a path of integration, a path where Israel's relations with its neighbors are normalized, a path where Israel's security is actually looked out for, including by its neighbors, a path where Palestinians achieve their political rights, and a path in which the biggest threat to Israel, to most of the countries in the region, and a threat that we share, Iran, is actually isolated. Now, whether we can move from the moment that we're in to actually start to travel down that path, that's going to be a big challenge. But you can see it, and it's something that the President is determined to try to pursue if we have the opportunity to do it. One other thing on this. We saw something related that was quite extraordinary about 2 weeks ago. Iran engaged in an unprecedented attack on Israel, the first direct attack from Iran to Israel. And some people said, well, it was designed so it wouldn't do much damage, carefully calibrated. Nothing of the sort. More than 300 projectiles launched at Israel, including more than 100 ballistic missiles. John and I were in the Situation Room watching this unfold. It's because Israel had very effective defenses, but also because the President, the United States, managed to rally on short notice a collection of countries to help. That damage was not done. And that also shows something in embryonic form the possibilities that Israel has for, again, being integrated, a regional security architecture that can actually, I think, keep the peace effectively for years to come. So that's where we want to go. But getting from here to there, of course, requires that the war in Gaza come to an end. And right now, the quickest path to that happening would be through this ceasefire and hostage deal.
I think a number of folks, myself included, have wondered why Hamas has not agreed to other proposals with regards to a ceasefire. What are we misunderstanding? What is their calculation? Why are they hesitating? This, I mean, we read about what's being proposed. It sounds like a no-brainer, but they must have a different calculation. What is going through their head? I mean, they want to just be martyrs? Is that, I mean, what is it that they hope to carry out, and why have they not just jumped on this as saying, "Oh yeah, this is fantastic"?
One of the challenges we have, of course, is that the leaders of Hamas that we're indirectly engaged with, through the Qataris, through the Egyptians, are of course living outside of Gaza, living in Qatar, living in Turkey, other places, and the ultimate decision makers are the folks who are actually in Gaza itself, with whom none of us have direct contact. So trying to understand what they're thinking is a challenge. Now, we have some sense of it, but it's far from perfect. And there are different theories about what's actually motivating their decisions in this time. It's something we're constantly trying to get at. But I can't give you a definitive answer. And I think we'll see, depending on what they actually do in this moment, whether in fact the Palestinian people, whom they purport to represent, if that's actually true. Because if it is true, then taking the ceasefire should be a no-brainer, as you said. But maybe something else is going on, and we'll have a better picture of that in the coming days.
Tell us about Bibi Netanyahu and what his position of power is, how he's seen among the Israeli people, what the level of commitment is in Israel for them to go into Rafah, to continue this effort. Where is he if this, I'm going to take the if out. I was going to go back to the ceasefire, but what's his political posture now in Israel?
Well, I think, as everyone knows, this is a complicated government. It's a balancing act when you have a coalition. And if you're just looking at the politics of it, that's something that he has to factor in. But here's what I'd say generally about this. Irrespective of what you think of the Prime Minister, government, what's important to understand is that much of what he's doing is not simply a reflection of his politics or his policies. It's actually a reflection of where a large majority of Israelis are in this moment. And I think it's important to understand that if we're really going to be able to meet this challenge. That's at least my observation. I've now been there 7 times since October 7th. And you get a chance to get a feel for what's going on in the society itself. And as I said at the start, you have a traumatized society, just as you have traumatized Palestinians. And breaking through that trauma in real time is an extraordinary challenge. But it's, I think, very important that we, as the United States, as Israel's friend, try to share what we think is not only in our interest, but also what's in their interest. And when it comes to Rafah, you mentioned that a moment ago. Look, our position's clear. The President's been clear on this. Absent a credible plan to genuinely protect the civilians who are in harm's way, and keep in mind, there are now 1.4 million or so people in Rafah, many of them displaced from the north. Absent such a plan, we can't support a major military operation going into Rafah, because the damage it would do is beyond what's acceptable. So we haven't seen such a plan yet, but right now, as I said, the focus is intensely on seeing if we can't get this agreement, because that would be a way of, I think, moving things in a different direction.
You may not want to answer this question, but that is the president sort of dipped his toe into the criticism of Israel and the way they've conducted the war so far, saying we're not entirely happy with how this has been carried out. What would our administration have done differently? What is our specific criticism, and what guidance will that provide for what they do going forward?
Well, let's start with the, in a sense, the obvious that seems to have been forgotten or almost erased from the conversation, which is October 7th itself. And it's extraordinary how quickly the world moved on from that. It's also extraordinary the extent to which Hamas isn't even part of the conversation. And I think that's worth a moment of reflection too. And so we've said from the start, and the president's been committed from the start to the proposition that Israel not only has a right to defend itself, not only has a right to try to make sure October 7th never happens again, it has an obligation. And so that's something that we have supported from day one. But we've also said, also from day one, how it does it matters. And here, the damage that's been done to so many innocent children, women, and men, again, in this crossfire of Hamas is making, has to be something that we focus on, as it has been from day one. Trying to make sure that the assistance gets to those who need it. Trying to make sure that civilians are protected to the greatest extent possible. Now, everyone here knows that this is almost a unique challenge, because when you have an enemy, a terrorist group like Hamas, that embeds itself with the civilian population in ways that we really haven't seen before, and that is hiding in and under mosques, schools, apartment buildings, it's an incredibly tall order. But even so, I think where we've been pushing our friends, again, from the very start, is to do as much as possible and to do more to look out for civilians and to make sure that those who need the help get it.
Why has the PR been so awful? I know that's not your area of expertise, but you have to have some thoughts on that, which is, I mean, as you've said, why has Hamas disappeared in terms of public perception? An offer is on the table to have a ceasefire, and yet the world is screaming about Israel. It's like, why aren't they screaming about Hamas? Accept the ceasefire, bring home the hostages. It's said it's all the other way around. I mean, typically the Israelis are good at PR. What's happened here? How have they and we been so ineffective at communicating the realities there and our point of view?
Well, look, I think there are two things. One is that, look, there is an inescapable reality, and that is the inescapable reality of people who have and continue to suffer grievously in Gaza, and that's real, and we have to be focused on that and attend to that. At the same time, how this narrative has evolved, yeah, it's a great question. I don't have a good answer to that. One can speculate about what some of the causes might be. I don't know. I can tell you this, and we were talking about this a little bit over dinner with Cindy. I think in my time in Washington, which is a little bit over 30 years, the single biggest change has been in the information environment. And when I started out in the early 1990s, everyone did the same thing. You woke up in the morning, you opened the door of your apartment, your house, you picked up a hard copy of the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. And then if you had a television in your office, you turned it on at 6:30 or 7 o'clock and watched the national network news. Now, of course, we are on an intravenous feed of information with new impulses, inputs every millisecond. And of course, the way this is played out on social media has dominated the narrative. And you have a social media ecosystem environment in which context, history, facts get lost, and the emotion, the impact of images dominates. And we can't discount that. But I think it also has a very, very, very challenging effect on the narrative.
Yeah, a small parenthetical point, which is some wonder why there was such overwhelming support for us to shut down potentially TikTok or other entities of that nature. If you look at the postings on TikTok and the number of mentions of Palestinians relative to other social media sites, it's overwhelmingly so among TikTok broadcast. So I'd note that's of real interest, and the president will get the chance to make action in that regard. The president also spoken about our commitment to a two-state solution, mm-hmm. and a number of people have said to me, that's impossible. And Bibi Netanyahu has basically said that's impossible. Is it possible to have a two-state solution? What kind of, I mean, I know that's far from where we are right now. It's like a whole different realm, but is that essential to, if you will, beginning normalization relations with Saudi Arabia and with others, to say, hey, here's a vision, here's some steps mm-hmm. we might get to. Is it possible, and what would that look like?
So for me, President, the answer is yes. And you can say that's, especially in this moment, naive, impossible, but I think that it is an imperative. And let me put it this way. First, we were talking about normalization with Saudi Arabia. I've sat with MBS multiple times, Crown Prince, and he's made clear that he wants to pursue normalization. And he'd like to do it as soon as possible, if we can conclude the agreements that we're trying to reach between the United States and Saudi Arabia. But then, two requirements. One, calm in Gaza. Two, a credible pathway to a Palestinian state. This is what people in the region need to see if they're going to fully get behind normalized relations between the remaining Arab countries and Israel. And it's also the right thing for the Palestinians. So there's that. But the other, I think, more fundamental question is this. You've got 5 million Palestinians living between the West Bank and Gaza. You've got about 7 million Jews. Palestinians aren't going anywhere. The Jews aren't going anywhere. There has to be an accommodation. Now, I think that some believe that the status quo that prevailed before October 7th, fine, let's live that way. And that worked brilliantly until it failed catastrophically. So at some point, I believe there has to be a step back. And everyone's going to have to ask themselves questions about what do we want the future to be? And the future that I talked about a few minutes ago, where Israel finally realizes what it has sought from day one, to be accepted in the region, to be part of the neighborhood. That's achievable. It's there, but it also requires a resolution to the Palestinian question. And I believe that there can be a Palestinian state with the necessary security guarantees for Israel. And to some extent, I think you have Israelis who would like to get to real separation. Well, that is one way to do it. And then who knows what happens in the following years. But of course, as we say this, we are absolutely committed to Israel's security. And Israel cannot and will not accept a Hamas stand coming together next door. But I'm convinced that there are ways to put the Palestinians on a pathway to a state that demonstrate that the state will not be what Israelis might fear, and I think can lead to a much better future than we have. Look, everyone in this room knows there's a long story here, and we were talking about TikTok, not a story you hear on TikTok. You had to oversimplify. After the creation of the State of Israel, you had decades of basically Arab rejection. That went away with Egypt and Jordan making peace and others following. Then you had some decades, in effect, of Palestinian rejection because deals were put on the table. Camp David, Ehud Olmert, others, that would have given Palestinians 95, 96, 97% of what they sought, but they were not able to get to yes. But I think the last decade or so has been one in which maybe Israelis became comfortable with that status quo. And as I say, I just don't think it's sustainable.
If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. Thank you very much. God bless you all.